Hello, founders. I'm here with my new friend and colleague, Vadim. Vadim is a multi-time founder, but we're going to get right into it because he's got a lot of things to share, and I think you're going to get a lot of education out of this. Vadim, too long did not read. Your last venture, how much money did you raise?
About 300 grand, a little bit from institutional and from angels.
All right, so 300,000 institutional, which is a big difference than raising with angels. And what milestones did you achieve with that 300,000?
Well, actually, we got to 100K in revenue before we raised any money, and that was very deliberate. We didn't want to go out and talk to investors until we were coming from a position of strength. But with that 300K, we got to $1 million in annual revenue.
Perfect. So that's a really solid growth in terms of going 100K to a million and would have allowed you to continue to raise. Let me ask you this question. How did you get to even that 100K? What would you say was the main thing? So you obviously bootstrapped. Did you put in your own money? Did you just kind of go with it and you made it happen? What was the story there?
I've started a bunch of companies and I was really tired of not making revenue for like a year, sometimes 2 years. It's hard to stay motivated working on something when you don't see pull in the market in the form of validation, i.e. revenue, in my opinion. And so when I was starting this venture, revenue was the only goal. So basically, me and my co-founder, who's my twin brother, agreed, what can we do in the shortest amount of time to make us the most amount of revenue? And so we put together something using no-code solutions, and we were generating revenue within a month and a half.
That's fantastic.
Yep.
That whole believe little paper that they have in Ted Lasso that they put over. I want to print something like that that says, how can we make the most amount of revenue in the shortest period of time? I think every founder should be doing that.
I agree 100%. I mean, look, I think it's easy with sort of what you read about founders and how you think about startups and entrepreneurship, what it should be. And oftentimes the headlines just say, hey, this company raised, 4 million pre-seed on an idea, right? But what they don't tell you is it's a multi-time founder that already has 3 successful exits. For especially first-time entrepreneurs or not first-time entrepreneurs that aren't proven yet, you got to prove yourself. And there's obviously different ways to prove yourself and sort of demonstrate credibility. But investors, potential business partners, everyone gets excited about something that is actually making money. And in the end of the day, no matter what venture you start, the only way to make sure that it's sustainable, i.e. can sustain you, the team, the growth, the R&D, whatever you want to do, is to be able to fund it through money. And it's much, much, much better if it's through revenue as opposed to just going out and raising a bunch of money at first.
So much easier to raise, having hit that milestone, having said, we know how to go out and get traction and do it with very little upfront. So you showed the upside, and that makes me as an investor go, if these two chaps can do this with no money and get to 100 grand, what could they do with my 300 grand is really what it came down to.
Exactly, because the other thing that entrepreneurs need to feel and believe is that you're going to be a good steward of their capital,
Yeah.
that you're actually going to turn it into more money and not just, blow through it and just spend it on a bunch of hires in New York City or whatever it is that's not really responsible. So if you can prove that you can make money, they'll just have that much more trust that you'll be able to spend their money wisely.
Great advice. Tell me a little bit about what the fundraising was like. Did you create a pitch deck, go out and do some cold calls, or did you have people kind of looking already, warm introductions? How did it happen?
We started with warm, and we supplemented it with cold. I think you need to do both, but of course, warm is always going to be better. We started off with a pitch deck that sucked. It didn't get any meetings, actually. We sent it out to our warm network and it didn't get any meetings. And we're like, what the heck's going on? Why? This is warm intros. It should work, right? But even with warm intros, you still need to get investors excited. The warm intros get you the foot in the door. They're not going to close the deal for you or anything like that. We decided to just simplify it. That was our initial mistake, is we overcomplicated things. And, as any founder, you really want to tell your story and you want to put everything out there. But that's just not how sales works. And fundraising is just another form of sales. You're selling investors on your vision and the future value of the company. And so we decided to simplify the deck. And then we went back to those same contacts. Because the other thing that we did, I think that was smart, is we didn't ask them to just email it to everybody. We said, can you choose 1 or 2 people in your network that can do it? And that way you can start seeing, okay, if it's not working, let's adjust it so that we don't just waste that equity sort of with this introduction and waste those potential introductions. So that's how we did it. And I always recommend start with anybody you know. I mean, even if they're not professional investors, start testing that with other people so that if they know there's going to be their money on the line, you're at least going to start to see their reactions and the types of questions they're going to ask you.
What I say is go A, B, C, concentric circles. A, are your warm leads, the people know you, love you, will do you a favor, give you honest feedback, and then slowly start to test Bs, which are the professional connections that know of you, will take your call, and then the Cs are the cold calls. But if you work your way through, and this is what I say, is if you're not willing to show your pitch deck to your close buddies to even have them go, I get it, I don't get it, a fellow founder, then you're not going to be ready to do cold calls and actually pitch investors that you don't know.
That's absolutely true. And you know what? I had a couple of meetings early on where the investor really ripped into me, and you're walking away from it like grilling, cutting you off, quite frankly. And you walk away from it feeling a little hurt, right? Like, oh, they don't love me or my vision or whatever. But actually, those were the most productive meetings, because if you can handle yourself with a difficult investor who's seen it all, who wants to cut through the BS, you can handle yourself with the easier meetings. And it just really, really forces you to over prepare. And that's another thing. Investors want to make sure you know your numbers cold, you know your market, you know your industry much, much, much better than them, even if they do deals in this space and they already know about this space, because then they're going to believe that you are the thought leader, one of the few people in the world that can actually make this thing successful.
Especially if you can give that investor novel insights by selling and saying, here's what I've learned selling this solution to today's customers. And if you can tell that investor, hey, I have an inside track, even with competition, they may say, well, what about this competitor? And you say, well, based on my experience, this is what I know that they don't know. And I think they're going in this direction and we're going to go in this direction. That's always helpful.
Oh, I love that. Now you have to be diplomatic when you do that, because investors don't want to feel they're wrong. But you don't make them feel wrong, but you just give them that additional insight. You educate them in a way that also elevates them and their knowledge as well. So you recognize their understanding of the market. But then if you can give them insight that they didn't have before, you're actually adding value to them, because they're going to take that to the other future meetings. They're going to repeat the same stuff over and over again. And by the way, industries, market trends, they're changing all the time. And so you actually will know more oftentimes than them by in real time speaking to potential customers and partners in the market.
What was your last startup? What was the idea? What were you doing? Problem that you were solving?
So I've started many companies where I had no business in running these companies. You get an idea, you're excited about it, you think the market's big, but you don't have the domain expertise, you don't have any competitive advantage. So that's the first thing I tell entrepreneurs is, if you're going to start, figure out where you have some competitive advantage, whether domain expertise and network, something, right? Because you're going to skip steps with other people that are starting that idea as well. And I had spent about a decade in tech, in sales and growth roles, so and product roles, non-technical roles. And I was already a professor at NYU. I was writing for Forbes, all that stuff, having academics reach out to me thinking that, I want to help them write their paper on PhDs. But I worked with MBAs. And that was actually my first insight. I worked with everybody from undergrad to MBA students. And, you had them coming to me saying, hey, I really liked your class or your workshop. This is more than I learned in, half the business classes that I took in school. And when I realized this, people are really, really hungry to learn from practitioners. That's number one. And number two, all of us are really curious about what we can do to have a competitive advantage in our career. And how can we develop these skills to actually be marketable in the market? We decided to start an education organization because, again, kind of fusing those two things, tech and education, which is where the space that I was playing in for several years. And I think that's why it started working very quickly. Within a couple of months, we were generating revenue because we had the network. We were hosting free events to start. We weren't charging people, but we could invite, a CMO from a big tech company, a VP of sales from Google, somebody from Slack, from Spotify, Netflix, whatever. We knew people in these companies. And then we also knew a bunch of successful founders because we worked with various venture funds, with various accelerators, people that then ended up raising, $100 million, whatever it is, right? And then coming in and talking to our community. And people were really hungry to learn and meet these people and learn from them. And sort of that initial insight helped us. But we ended up kind of iterating on the product with our initial audience. We wrote a Forbes article. It went viral. We had an email list of 1,000 people. So again, pull demand in the market. Something is working. But I really think that it worked because this was our space. The things that we were able to accomplish in 1 to 2 months would take another founder and entrepreneur that didn't have the network or the domain expertise potentially years. And that's the power of working on something where it really speaks to you and your story. And by the way, investors love to hear that because they want to make sense of why this founder, why is this person working on this problem, and is there sort of founder market fit? Some of the audience may have heard that term. Founder market fit is actually pretty important for investors too.
Founder market fit is one of the lessons I learned later that probably would have saved me a lot of headache. Let's expand for a moment. Founder problem fit that can lead to problem solution fit. So the founder has the expertise to solve the problem, and then problem solution fit, my problem actually solves the problem. Great. But then there's the entire aspect of the market. distribution, getting people to even look at your MVP. And that's what founder market fit is. So what I'm hearing is you had enough reps, like writing for Harvard Business Review, Forbes, being a professor, being in the mecca of Silicon Alley over there in New York. You understood the market, you were connected to it, you could sense the vibe, and that made you launching your MVP so much easier.
When you say to someone, whether it's customers or partners or potential employers or investors, hey, I want to solve this problem, you don't want them to have to then question why. Why you? Why are you working on this? Whereas if you tell the sort of founder story, the origin story of why you're working on the idea, it should click right away why you are the right person, or the founding team are the right people to actually tackle this problem. Because look, obviously entrepreneurship is hard. We all know the rates of failure for startup companies across sectors, not even just technology. And so again, you're building that credibility. And if you can sort of squash that objection up front, why is this person worrying about this problem? It's just yet another thing you don't have to worry about coming up in the future. And again, as a founder, CEO, you're going to have to get really good at saying the same thing over and over and over and over again every single day for years and years and years to everybody as you're sort of pitching yourself to speak at conferences, or trying to get away with hiring an employee but without being able to pay them a huge salary because you didn't raise that big round yet. You want them to really be bought into the mission and the vision. And again, that credibility will help them skip that step of doubt of like, okay, is this person actually going to succeed? If you are the person that should be working on this company, you're going to sort of minimize a lot of that doubt, if not squash it completely. And you'll be able to do all that stuff that CEOs and founders need to do to sort of be resourceful in the early days.
Let's talk about then what you did with your first check. You're revenue oriented, making $100,000. You get that first check in. What did you do with that to begin the path to get to $1 million ARR?
My co-founder and I, we come from sales, and we were enrolling all of our students. It was one-to-one sales, which we've done a lot, one-to-one SMB sales, small, medium-sized businesses. I knew how to get a prospect on the phone and get them to a close. It's something I'm really, really good at in my career. Me and my co-founder closed the first 100 students. Right. So that means we spoke with 300 to 500 students, right? Which means thousands of leads, right? So obviously all of our time was spent on the phone, but we closed the first 100 students, which meant that we had the process down tight. And for us, that meant expanding the team, right? And the admissions team specifically for our organization. And so at the sort of early stages, there's kind of two types of hires you can make. Someone that's really young and hungry and just will execute very, very well within the organization and just learn really, really quickly. Or someone experienced very specifically in the thing that you need them to be experienced in, so that there's no sort of 6-month ramp for them to be productive. They're basically going to be productive within 2 to 4 weeks, right? And so we needed the latter person. We already had a bunch of young folks working on the team, super, super smart people. We now needed someone experienced that could essentially take all the SOPs, the processes that we created for the sales that we got really good at, learn it, start pitching within a week or two, and then start sort of closing and matching our close rate within a month or two. And that's exactly what we did. But as you can imagine, those types of hires aren't cheap. So that hire was a little bit more expensive, but again, helped us double our sales. And also we were recruiting a lot of instructors from these big tech companies. And that's just covering sort of operational costs for running our programs, and these founders and entrepreneurs, and the rest of the money went to them. So it was mainly human capital and a little bit of product development.
Since you already knew how to generate revenue, knew how to acquire customers, you put them into the SOPs, which a lot of founders don't do. A lot of founders won't do founder-led sales right out of the gate. They're scared. And then two, even if they do get founder-led sales, they don't standardize the procedures, the process, and the quality, so they can't replicate themselves. But since you had that all figured out, it was just a matter of investing in scale and growth versus I'm going to build the product, or I'm going to figure shit out and waste money on doing all these little experiments.
Yeah, and look, it's not that things aren't going to change when you hire other smart people. As a matter of fact, that first sales hire, he helped us figure out so many things that we were kind of doing a little bit wrong, or optimizations that we could make in our sort of funnel for getting somebody to enroll that we didn't even think about, right? So the SOPs are going to change over time. But by bringing on that hire, we were forced to get everything down on paper. How do we handle objections? How do we, actually communicate the price of the product? All this different stuff. And then, and then that other person, if they're really good and smart and hardworking, they'll make your process and product even better. But you want to give them a starting point. You never want to hire someone and say, hey, you figure it out from zero. Again, they're going to be, maybe they'll do the right thing, but there's a higher chance that you're just going to spin a lot of cycles making mistakes because they just don't have the context and insight. So figure something out that works first, hand it off to them to own and manage, and then help them do their thing really, really well, even if that means changing things around, but at least they'll have a starting point to work off of.
Let's get into reality. I'm going to let the cat out of the bag. Vadim, you've joined us here at Startups.com, another lead advisor with us, part of the team. I'm totally happy that you're joining. This was quite the search to get to you. What happened? What's the reason you transitioned?
Markets shift, and that was our biggest problem within the organization. We were investing a lot into marketing and sales. We got to a point where we could predictably close a $70,000 to $100,000 month, and we were sort of off to the races, hoping that we could get to that $2 to $3 million or $3 to $5 million next step. But then the markets shifted, right? And that happened for a lot of companies. A lot of companies in our space actually started to close down pretty quickly because they did not have the runway, right? So 2-3 months of missing enrollment targets, and they were closing their doors. We were able to go on for quite a while longer, but basically, our whole value proposition was helping people transitioning into tech. Once you had a lot of these tech layoffs happening, that value proposition didn't work quite well. We did actually start to see some early signs with a couple of other directions, like working in Latin America with people that wanted to work for US-based companies, and there's a lot of companies coming here and hiring outsourced talent. But we were running out of capital by the time we figured that out. Right now, my co-founder and brother is running the company. We had to lay off the team. That happens, right? We had some expensive people working for us. It was just basically down to the two of us, and we got to the point where you didn't even need the two of us. So he's still working on the business and exploring different things that are going to take time, because we're going back to the same process, which is you can't, we don't want to like raise a bunch of money from a weak position. Also, the markets aren't just there to raise a bunch of money. My brother started talking to some investors early on just to build those relationships. But again, you want to go to them once something's working again, and it's taken a while to figure that out. So he's kind of working on that himself. That may take another year to get to a point where or 2 years to get to a point where you're generating revenue again. And one thing my advisor told us early on, we had an advisor who sold a company in the space for $100 million from the very beginning. Actually, he was one of our angels that came in. One of the things he said that is when you're running a company, or when you're trying to solve any particular problem, you will come to near death or failure several times, sometimes, every 2 or 3 years. I have a lot of founder friends that in this time have completely dissolved their companies. These things happen. Again, laying off people sucks. It wasn't fun. We made these people were our friends. We had to cut salaries of our instructors by 50%. Luckily, they loved us, and most of them taught for at least 18 months with us. So then they had full-time jobs working at Google. They didn't really need the salary, but they agreed right away, right? So you have to have those difficult conversations. But the reality is, I knew that my time will be better spent, working on something exciting and a new challenge at the same time. And that's when I came across you guys. I love working with founders. That's my calling, I think. So, I've been following startups for a long time. I've been getting those emails from Will for a long time, years, quite frankly. And actually, my last company was supposed to be Startups.com, like a very similar company. We just ended up pivoting into tech career opportunities because of COVID. But I've been thinking about the problem for a long time, and I thought, wow, what a cool opportunity to join an organization that's been doing it for such a long time, is already really, really good at it. I can basically fast forward 10 years on working on this problem. And so it's already been a ton of fun working with founders. I'm excited to continue to help people execute and get traction, and actually, working on some of the new products and exciting things that we're up to at the organization.
True founder, that's who you are when you care more about the problem, solving the problem, than let's say just the vehicle in which you're going to do it, the startup. You see a founder who is going down the same path as you, and you're like, I think they're going to make the same moves. In hindsight, because hindsight's always 2020, what would you be advising founders to think about to address some of the issues and challenges that you ran into?
When you have capital and revenue coming in consistently, everything's exciting and you're in spending mode, right? And by the way, you do have to invest money to grow. That's just how business works. That's why venture funding exists, right? To be able to scale much quicker than you would, be able to hire the expensive people, invest in growth marketing, whatever it is. But I actually learned that you need to be a lot more conservative with your capital or with reinvesting your revenue than you think. Usually, you don't need as much money as you think you do, and that includes paying expensive people. I would probably think about hiring a little bit differently. Number one, right? Can I get away with bringing on hires that can become productive but not spend as much money on those salaries? And again, not to say that you should underpay people, not to say that you shouldn't spend on expensive people later on, but we only raised 300 grand, right? We didn't have a $10 million round. So that's number one. Number two, honestly, don't hire agencies really early on, or at least if you do, make sure that they're going to be very, very effective with your capital. But we were spending on paid acquisition with agencies. No, you got to figure it out yourself. Hire somebody from an agency if you want, but don't contract out an agency. That's going to be really expensive. And number three, I would say is, you can actually get away with hiring a lot of folks that are hungry and just want the experience because they want to learn from you as the CEO, from you as the domain expert. That's actually their main motivation. And again, you don't have to underpay them or anything. You can still pay them fair market rate. But when you find somebody for whom the value is, hey, I want to learn from you, it just makes everything easier, right? And there's other folks for whom the value is going to be mainly the money, and those tend to not work out that well. So those are kind of like the three things, with the sort of number one overarching theme being: be careful with your capital. You're always going to get excited about growth metrics and sales, especially when money's coming in, but it could go away with market shifts or even marketing just not working for a couple of months, right? And that means that you have to have a plan B of how you're going to actually slow down your spend very, very quickly.
So many founders are not financially literate. And I'm not knocking founders whatsoever. Of course they're not. They're solving problems. They've never run a business. They've never had to look at a business from that aspect. Like when they're raising money and suddenly investors are asking for due diligence and your data room and your projections and what's your model and are they pressure tested, battle tested assumptions. That is scary. So getting advice or getting mentored to become financially savvy, you don't have to become a CPA or CFO, just get financially savvy and understand you have two jobs as a founder. Don't run out of money, don't run out of money. Hope for the best, plan for the worst. That's what we talk about all the time. What are you gonna do if this all goes belly up? Because founders just think, oh, the good times are gonna roll and everything's gonna go up and to the right. And the last thing is all about agencies and hires. Agencies come with their own overhead. You're gonna be paying for that. They need to be profitable too. And employees come with all these additional expenses and they take time to ramp up. I say hire scrappy agencies or individuals, and if they tell you we need $9,000 to get this going, I'll say, okay, what can you do for $900 and show me what's going on there. And then employees, I like what you're saying. Give people a chance, because if you've done it right, instead of trying to hire the person with all the experience, which is like getting the star quarterback who's already had the massive contracts, go find the scrappy person with the right attitude. Hire for attitude, train for skill is another adage that we can say.
That's exactly right. I want to touch on a couple of things that you said, Ed. We actually got that agency down to about $2,000 a month, and so we tried to be conservative with the spend. But you're right; they need margin. They're working on a bunch of different projects and clients. They're not going to be the domain expert, and there's going to be ramp up time, and it's just time that you don't have as a founder. I really like what you said about you don't have to be a CFO, but you do have to get literate in that stuff. And that's actually, I think, a little bit of a shock early on for first-time founders or CEOs, quite frankly, who end up doing a lot of that work. You're gonna have to read a lot of legal documents. You're gonna have to read a lot of financial statements. You're gonna have to do stuff that you might really not like to do or have zero exposure in, right? So one piece of advice, if you're still, let's say, at a company or something, or at another startup, well, before you start your own company, try to get some of those responsibilities, or at least some insight. Hey, I want to give you feedback on the contract so you can get some experience with that, because my co-founder, my brother, he had experience put together a venture fund for Venture for America, right? The nonprofit that Andrew Yang started. My brother worked for that, and he ran their Accelerator program. So he had to put together a venture fund. That's hundreds and hundreds of hours of working with lawyers. He loved that work. I'm not gonna lie, it wasn't the most fun, but lawyers get things wrong all the time because they also have a lot of clients, just like an agency does. And again, they're not gonna know your business or your interests better than you. So even though you're not a lawyer, you will catch mistakes they make. Even though if you're not an accountant, you will catch mistakes that an accountant makes, right? All this different stuff you have to get at least somewhat literate in, because in the end of the day, the buck stops at you, and no one is going to be able to, pull you out of a bind if you end up missing a really, really big mistake, or just someone, that had good intentions but really didn't think about your business in the way that you're thinking about it in the next 3, 4, 5 years. So you're gonna have to get at sales, marketing, accounting, hiring, legal, all that's different stuff. Jack and Jill of all trades. Be ready to do that, and some of it won't be fun, but buck stops at you.
I'm a founder at Startups.com, and I'm looking at the team of Ed and Vadim. And I can go talk to Ed or Vadim. What should I be asking you? What should be on my mind to come and talk to you? And I'm curious, after spending this little bit of time together, what do you think that you can add that's different than what I add? How are we working together that way?
For me, any founder I meet, whether they're already generating millions of dollars or they're super early idea stage or whatever it is, they're fundraising, I'm gonna ask them, how are you thinking about your next milestones of traction? That's mostly what I care about. And here's why. Traction, obviously, everybody throws that word around. But here's a bigger why. Startups are hard. You get demoralized, you get knocked down way more than you get picked up, right? The only way that you can go from string of failure or rejection to the next failure or rejection is if you have some wins and successes. And for an entrepreneur, nothing feels better than generating revenue and or talking to users or customers that absolutely love what you're doing. It takes time to get to that, obviously. You're not going to have product market fit right away. But if you care about the problem you're solving, you will pretty quickly find users, customers that love what you're doing. And that feels really, really good. And to me, that's traction. Yes, developing a product that people love, but also getting them to use it, and more importantly, getting them to invest their own dollars into it because they love it so much. And if you're able to get that traction, whatever that means for you, you're going to continue on to that next rejection or failure, and then on to the next success and the next inflection point. So that's the most important thing to me. Again, I'm a sales-focused guy. Sales and product are kind of the two things I focus on in my career, but sales first. Remember, I generated revenue before raising any money for my last startup, and I think any company I build in the future is going to have that sort of North Star. So that's what we're going to spend time about, is how do we actually get your product or service used by real humans so that you can feel really, really good about and motivated about your business.
I love it. We're going to do this. I'm going to ask founders, what are you doing about traction while you're raising money and doing all this other stuff? And if they look at me and they say, I don't know, or how, or I need help, I'm going to say, go talk to Vadim. He's going to have you covered. Let's do it that way.
Let's do it that way. One thing I told the founder yesterday when I was talking to them is investors invest in lines, not dots. If you have a really great background or you have this MVP launched, great. What else are you doing, right? You're going to be, an investment process usually doesn't take a day. It takes at the very least months, and it could take several months, right? 6 months to a year to run a fundraising process. So you're building relationships with these investors over time. They need to continue to see progress and traction in that time, and nothing gets the deal to a close faster than you saying, hey, I just had a bunch of traction. I need to add fuel to the fire. By the way, I have these other investors that are already excited. Do you want to be in? You can close that deal in a week or two if you've already been building that relationship over the course of several months. Lines, not dots. Remember, yeah, you might get investors excited, but you need to continue to get them excited to get them to a close.
That's another placard I need to make for you. Lines, not dots. Investors want lines, not dots. Totally well said. Vadim, I'm so excited to work with you, and I just want to encourage everybody, if you're watching this from Startups.com, our community, thank you so much. If you are not part of Startups.com, we're putting out as many resources as possible that you can start to glean from and learn from. When you're ready, come join our community, because you get access to advisors like Vadim and all these other founders, because I just realized that is totally what we do, is we're getting other great founders to teach other founders as well. We're creating that network, that platform for everybody to work together. It's going to be great. So Vadim, last word to you.
Last word is keep your head up, keep on going. Whatever you're building should exist. And if you need any help and you're part of the community at Startups.com, let's meet.